My name is Isabel Hartley. I'm 29 years old, and last year, I died. Well, not officially, but the doctors told my parents I wouldn't make it through the night. Their response? She's not really ours. We were just doing someone a favor. Then they walked out, left me to die alone in a hospital bed. 1 week later, they showed up at my grandmother's estate with my brother Daniel, smiling, entitled, expecting to collect what they believed was theirs. But they didn't find a grieving family or a somber attorney. They found a locked door, an empty house, and a single letter waiting for them on the piano. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, if you've ever had love held out like a prize you could never win, this story is for you. Trust me, what you're about to hear is not about revenge. It's about revelation. I grew up in the quiet, misty suburbs of Seattle, where the pine trees outnumbered people and everyone seemed to know what kind of car your parents drove. Our house sat on a hill with a view of the Sound. White siding, red door, glass atrium, beautiful in every sense. Picture perfect. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family featured in home design magazines. A brilliant architect father, a well-connected mother who volunteered at every fundraiser, a charming son, Daniel. And then there was me, Isabel. The fortunate edition, as my mother liked to call me at dinner parties. My childhood photos are full of coordinated outfits and stiff smiles. There were ski vacations in Banff, birthdays with balloon arches, matching 4th of July shirts. But what they don't show is how often I felt like a guest in my own life. I remember the first time I realized I didn't quite belong. I was 5. Daniel had knocked over a glass sculpture in the living room. When my mother came rushing in, I was already trying to sweep up the mess with my bare hands. "What happened here?" she demanded. "I did it," I said without thinking. She sighed, but not at me. Later that night, I overheard her on the phone with a friend. "Isabel's always been helpful. Daniel has drive. She just follows." Drive. That was the word they always used for him. When Daniel lied, it was cleverness. When he refused chores, it was independence. When I aced my tests without anyone reminding me to study, it was because I was a quiet achiever. He got the biggest bedroom. He got to pick where we went on family weekends. His messy drawings covered the fridge. Mine were carefully stored in a labeled folder in the basement. "Your brother needs the confidence boost," my father explained once when I asked why Daniel's C+ in chemistry earned more praise than my robotics competition win. "You're already good at everything." It wasn't about fairness, it was about favoritism, and I accepted it for a long time. Until one rainy evening when I was 13 and overheard something that changed everything. It was late, maybe close to midnight. The rain tapped softly against the skylights, and I had crept downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed the kitchen, I heard my parents' voices, sharp, low, and unmistakably tense. "You said it would be temporary," my mother hissed. "We did the adoption to look generous, to recover from the miscarriage, but then I got pregnant with Daniel just 2 months later." My breath caught in my chest. "She's not even ours, Carter," she continued. "She was never meant to stay this long." There was a pause. I remember the sound of the refrigerator humming, my father sighing. "She was Eleanor's idea," he said finally. "She pushed for it. She said we owed her that much after everything." I didn't wait to hear the rest. The glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. My parents fell silent. Footsteps, a chair scraping. I ran up the stairs and dove under the covers, heart pounding, eyes wide open. When my mother came into my room moments later, she just looked at me and said, "Did you have a bad dream?" I didn't answer. She kissed my forehead like nothing had happened. The next morning, I waited for the truth, for explanations, for reassurance that I was wanted, that I was loved. Instead, over eggs and toast, my father read the paper, and my mother scrolled through her phone. "I heard you last night," I said, my voice small but clear. "I know I'm adopted." My father didn't look up. My mother gave that tight, polished smile she reserved for cocktail parties and award banquets. Don't be silly, Isabel, she said lightly. You must have misunderstood. That was it. No confirmation, no denial. Just a wave of dismissal that swept over me like cold water. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a warning. In our family, appearances mattered more than truth, and feelings were dangerous if they couldn't be curated and contained. That day, something inside me shifted. If I couldn't be loved simply for existing, maybe I could earn it, prove I was worth keeping. I threw myself into schoolwork, science fairs, anything that might make me indispensable. By 16, I had already coded my first robotic prototype for assisted mobility. By 19, I was the youngest intern at a medical device lab in Seattle. By 25, I'd launched my first startup focused on neuroassistive robotics, helping stroke patients recover mobility. My parents showed up at my Stanford graduation. They smiled in the photos, shook hands with my professors, told everyone they were so proud. But when I looked at the pictures later, I saw it clearly. The distance in their eyes. Like they were looking at a product they'd invested in, not a daughter. Only my grandmother, Eleanor Hartley, had ever looked at me and seen a person. She lived in a sprawling, ivy-covered home nestled on the edge of the Olympic National Forest. Every summer, I spent weeks with her there, away from the weight of being the adopted one. Her walls were lined with books, the air smelled like cedar and lavender. Her presence felt like belonging. When I was 15, as we baked a plum tart together in her rustic kitchen, she looked at me quietly and said, "You look just like your mother." My hands froze mid-whisk. "Your birth mother," she clarified gently, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Her name was Rachel. She was special. "Who was she?" I whispered. Eleanor smiled sadly. "Someone who loved you very much but couldn't keep you. One day I'll tell you everything." But that day never seemed to come. After college, it became when you're more settled, then when the time is right. And eventually, soon, my dear. But soon kept slipping further away. Still, she never stopped loving me. Not like the people who had raised me. Because as my company rose, my parents seemed to drift further. My father's architecture firm began working with a rival medical company, one openly trying to undercut my technology. When I asked him about the ethics, he said, "This is business, Isabel. Don't take it personally." Daniel, on the other hand, had dropped out of grad school after one semester and was now working in real estate, unsuccessfully. Yet every Thanksgiving, my mother would brag about how entrepreneurial he was. The last time I saw all of them together was 2 years ago, at Christmas. And it was the conversation at that dinner table that finally broke me. Christmas at my parents' house had always felt like theater. Elegant decorations, coordinated family outfits, and a menu curated to impress neighbors, not to nourish loved ones. That year was no different. The fireplace was lit, the roast was perfectly pink in the center, and crystal glasses clinked with every performative toast. But Eleanor was there too, seated at the end of the table in her signature navy cardigan, a quiet strength in a room full of curated smiles. She was frailer than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp, watching everything. The conversation turned, inevitably, to work. My company had just announced a major partnership with a medical university in Sweden to test our new robotic exosuit. It was the kind of deal that made headlines. "I always knew Isabel would do something remarkable," Eleanor said proudly, placing her hand gently over mine. I felt a warmth spread through my chest. "Well," my mother said with a sip of wine, "she's always been determined to prove herself. Classic middle child syndrome." There was a pause, like someone had knocked all the air out of the room. "Prove myself?" I echoed, setting down my fork. "You know what I mean," she replied breezily. "Adopted children often have that edge, that drive. It's nothing to be ashamed of." Daniel looked up from his plate. "Wait, what?" My father waved a dismissive hand. "She knows. She's known since she was 13. "But you've always denied it," I said, my voice low and steady. "Every time I asked, you made me feel like I was crazy, like I imagined things." We thought it was better not to dwell, my father replied. You had a stable home, the best schools, every opportunity. Most adopted children would be grateful. I felt the blood leave my face. You never wanted me, I whispered. You wanted the story, the look of charity, a child to complete your image, but not me. Not really. That's enough, Eleanor said, her voice firm. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. 20 years of trying to earn a place in a family that never intended to give me one came crashing down all at once. You only loved me when I reflected well on you, I said. When I succeeded, when I stayed quiet. You didn't love me for me. You loved the illusion of me. I stood up, my napkin falling to the floor. I'm done pretending. Done begging for scraps of affection. I'm not staying here a second longer. I left my coat behind, stepping out into the cold night without a second glance. That was the last time I saw my parents in person. I changed my number the next day. Moved to a new apartment with no forwarding address. The only person I kept in touch with was Eleanor. We met once a week, sometimes just for tea, sometimes for hours of conversation in her sun-drenched study. They do love you, she told me once. They just don't know how to show it. Love isn't supposed to be this hard, I replied. 6 months later, she passed away in her sleep. I was in Copenhagen at a tech symposium when it happened. My parents never called, never emailed. I found out through a certified letter from Eleanor's attorney informing me that she had left me everything. Her home, her assets, her library, her trust. I never got to hear the full truth from her lips. But fate had another plan for revealing the secrets she never told. Because less than a week after receiving that letter, I was in a hospital bed, broken and unconscious, while my parents made a decision that changed everything. They let me die. Or so they thought. The day of the accident started like any other. It was early March in Seattle. Wet, gray, and cold. My team and I had been running late-stage diagnostic tests on our newest prototype. We were ahead of schedule, and I was determined to keep it that way. You should go home, Isabel, my co-founder Rhea said, glancing at the wall clock. It's after 9, the report can wait. But I've never been good at leaving things unfinished. By the time I packed up and stepped outside, the drizzle had turned into a cold, hammering downpour. I remember hesitating in the doorway, considering calling a rideshare. But my apartment was only 15 minutes away. I told myself, what could happen in 15 minutes? I remember the turn onto Alvarado Boulevard. I remember the flash of headlights. And then, nothing. They told me later that a delivery truck, speeding down the hill, skidded on wet pavement and hit me at full force on the driver's side. My car spun, collided with a guardrail, flipped once, then again. When paramedics arrived, they had to cut me out of the wreckage. I had a fractured pelvis, a shattered left arm, 2 broken ribs, and a cranial hemorrhage. They rushed me to Harborview Medical Center, where a neurosurgeon on duty placed me into a medically induced coma to stabilize the brain swelling. I remember none of this, but I remember the voices. Drifting in and out of awareness, I heard snippets, beeping monitors, medical jargon, a nurse saying my name again and again, then another voice, calm and clinical. She's stable for now, but without surgical intervention, we risk irreversible brain damage. Has anyone contacted her emergency contact? Someone asked. So we called her parents. They're on the way. In the darkness, I waited, powerless, paralyzed. Then I heard them. My parents, my mother's tone, cold and clipped. My father's voice, always controlled, always careful. Mr. and Mrs. Hartley, a doctor said. I'm Dr. Chu. Your daughter suffered significant trauma. We need authorization to proceed with surgery. There was a silence. She's not really our daughter, my mother said. We took her in years ago. It was never official. She listed you as her emergency contacts, the doctor replied. Because she had no one else, my father added smoothly. But we're not obligated. We were never her legal guardians. It was more of an informal arrangement. That wasn't true. I knew it. They knew it. And yet in that moment, they repeated it like gospel, as if rewriting my life could erase their responsibility. "We're not in a position to authorize treatment," my mother said. "We're not liable for her medical expenses. Without consent, we can't move forward with surgery," the doctor stated flatly. "Then don't," my father said. "There must be a state fund for patients like her." And just like that, they walked out. They left me, broken, bleeding, unconscious, as if I meant nothing. A nurse, Joan, I would later learn, stood up for me. "We need to call hospital legal. We'll proceed under emergency provisions. Get a phone from her things, check for other contacts." Time blurred. I floated in the in-between, gripped by pain I couldn't escape and silence I couldn't break. But someone kept talking to me. Soft, steady, a voice like calm water. It was Nurse Joan. "I'm not leaving you alone, Isabel," she whispered during every shift. "Not after what I heard. You deserve better than that." 3 days later, they reached Rhea. She rushed to the hospital, signed every form, called her lawyer, and ordered every file. "They tried to let you die," she whispered as she brushed my hair back from my forehead. "But I won't let them bury you and steal what's yours." I couldn't respond. But inside, beneath the coma, something flickered to life. Not rage, not revenge. Resolve. The surgery happened on the 5th day. I remember only flashes, bright lights wheeling past above me, the sharp smell of antiseptic, then nothing. Darkness swallowed everything until slowly something like awareness crept back in. The first voice I heard was Joan's. "You made it, Isabel," she said softly. "The surgery went well. You're safe now." It took another 2 days before I could move my hand when asked. Another 3 before I could open my eyes to the blinding fluorescent lights. When the breathing tube came out, I gagged on air, disoriented and aching. My body was broken, my thoughts scattered, but I was alive. And I remembered. Everything. Their words, their abandonment, the cold dismissal of my life. They hadn't just failed to protect me. They had walked away when I needed them most. They had left me to die because I was inconvenient, because I wasn't really their daughter. Recovery was brutal. The first time the physical therapist sat me up, I vomited from the pain. Standing required 2 people and a walker. My ribs ached with every breath, and my arm was casted like a shield I couldn't wield. But physical pain faded. What lingered was the psychological poison. They hadn't called. Not once. Not to check. Not to ask. Not even to pretend. And still, somehow, they were trying to claim my grandmother's estate. It was Rhea who finally told me. She came into my room one morning with a hard look in her eyes and a folder in her hand. "Your parents filed for emergency conservatorship," she said. "They're claiming you're mentally unfit to handle your own affairs. That you've suffered irreversible brain damage." My breath caught. "They filed it 3 days after your accident," she added, "the same day they walked out of this hospital." My hands trembled. "They're trying to steal everything Eleanor left you." But I had something they didn't expect. Eleanor's attorney, Mr. Thomas Whitmore, arrived the following day. A stately man in his 60s with kind eyes and a voice like polished oak. "Miss Hartley," he said warmly, "your grandmother spoke of you often. She trusted you more than anyone." He pulled a sealed envelope from his briefcase. "She asked me to give you this if anything ever happened to her before she could tell you the full truth." My heart raced as I took it. I waited until the room was quiet, until the machines beeped steady, until the sky outside turned a soft blue. Then I opened it. Inside was a letter in Eleanor's graceful cursive. And documents, birth records, DNA results, notarized adoption papers. My hands trembled as I read. "My dearest Isabel, if you're reading this, I've failed to keep my promise to tell you in person. But you deserve to know the truth. You were not abandoned. You were loved. Fiercely. Completely. From the very beginning. Your mother was my daughter, Rachel. She was 19 when she had you. Brilliant and stubborn, just like you. But my husband, your grandfather, was traditional. He thought her pregnancy would ruin our family name, so I convinced Rachel to let my son Carter and his wife raise you. Keep you close, keep you safe. But then Margaret got pregnant with Daniel. Suddenly, they had two babies. One they chose, one they didn't. I saw how they treated you. I tried to intervene, but I thought you'd be better off with two parents than one tired grandmother. That was my mistake. And I'm so sorry. But let there be no doubt. You are legally adopted. These are the papers. Your mother loved you. I loved you. And what I leave you now is yours by every right, blood, law, and heart. Forgive me for not telling you sooner. All my love, Eleanor. I clutched the letter to my chest and cried. Not because I was broken, but because for the first time, I felt whole. That night, after the nurses dimmed the lights and the hallway quieted to a hush, I read Eleanor's letter again. Then I read the documents. There it was, black and white proof. My original birth certificate, naming Rachel Hartley as my mother. Legal adoption papers signed by Carter and Margaret Hartley. A court seal. My amended birth certificate listing them as my legal parents. They had lied to the hospital. They had lied to me. And now they were trying to lie to the courts. But this time, I had the truth. And I had no intention of staying silent. The next morning, I called Thomas Whitmore from my hospital bed. My voice was still hoarse, my body still sore, but I was clear. We need to stop them, I said. We already are, he assured me. Their conservatorship claim triggered a full medical review. I've submitted affidavits from your doctors confirming your capacity. The judge has frozen all movement on the estate until your next hearing. Do we have evidence? I asked. He paused. Then, yes, the hospital security footage. Your friend Rhea had the foresight to request it. I've reviewed it. I didn't ask what it showed. I already knew. My parents think I'm still in a coma, I said slowly. They think I'm too weak to fight back. They'll be surprised, Thomas replied. The days that followed were a blur of rehab, legal prep, and quiet resolve. I pushed myself in physical therapy harder than I ever had, through the pain, the fatigue, the bitter memories. I wasn't just fighting to walk again, I was preparing for war. When Dr. Chu finally cleared me for discharge, Rhea came to pick me up. I'd lost 10 pounds, still needed a cane. My scars hadn't fully healed, but I was stronger than I'd ever been. You sure about this? She asked as we loaded into her car. I've never been more sure, I said. They think this is about money, about a house, but it's not. It's about truth. It's about finally being seen. That night, Rhea's spare bedroom became my war room. I pinned a timeline to the wall. Accident, hospital admission, abandonment, conservatorship filing. I connected every event with red thread, documenting everything. I created folders, legal, medical, personal. I wrote down every word I remembered from their hospital conversation. And then I started drafting the letter. The one they'd find waiting for them. It took me days, draft after draft. Some were furious, others too cold. Some sounded like a closing argument, others like a eulogy. None of them felt right. Until one night, after a brutal therapy session, I sat on the edge of the bed, looked at Eleanor's photo, and asked myself, what do I really want from them? Not revenge, not control. Closure. So I wrote from that place, not as a daughter desperate for love, but as a woman who had survived being discarded and who no longer needed validation to know her worth. I detailed everything. The childhood neglect, the lies about the adoption, their decision to walk away while I lay dying. I included legal copies of my adoption documents, DNA results, Eleanor's letter, a USB drive with the hospital footage. But I didn't stop there. At the very end, I wrote, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I do. I release you from any obligation to me, and I release myself from needing your love. I am whole without you. I sealed it in an envelope. Then I made a call to Thomas. They're going to visit the house next weekend, he told me. Filed a motion to collect sentimental belongings. Standard move. Good, I said. Let's make sure the cameras are on, and let's make sure the letter is waiting for them. Saturday arrived, draped in a gray, unassuming sky, the kind Seattle wears so often it becomes invisible. But there was nothing unassuming about what was about to happen. From Ria's apartment, I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, security camera feeds arranged neatly in a 4-screen split. Every corner of Eleanor's estate was visible. The foyer, the hallway, the grand dining room, the sitting room where the letter waited on polished mahogany. At exactly 2:06 p.m., the security system pinged. A black Mercedes SUV pulled into the gravel driveway. My mother stepped out first, in a pale pink coat she probably thought made her look soft and approachable. My father followed, checking his watch like he was late for a business meeting. And behind them, hesitant, unsure, was Daniel. I hadn't spoken to my brother in years. He trailed behind them as they walked to the door. "The key's not working," my father said, twisting it hard. "Try the back," my mother suggested. I shouldn't have to go through the back door of my own mother's house. Daniel corrected softly. "It was your mother's house." Inside the house, the security team had done their job. Locks changed, cameras installed, letter placed exactly where I asked, centered on the dining room table, beneath the antique chandelier Eleanor had always loved. Outside, my father pulled out his phone. A locksmith arrived 10 minutes later. "They came prepared," Ria muttered beside me, arms crossed. "Let them in," I whispered. "Let them think they've won." Once inside, the shift was immediate. My mother's voice floated through the mic. "Well, she hasn't touched anything. How noble. Richard, check the study. I want to make sure the sterling is still here." Daniel wandered the hallway alone, brushing his fingers along the carved molding. His face was unreadable. "This would look perfect in our foyer," my mother said, lifting a crystal vase. "We're here for Mom's belongings," Daniel reminded her. "Oh, please. Isabel doesn't care about antiques. She barely cared about your grandmother." On the screen, I watched Daniel pause mid-step. Then they entered the dining room. "What's this?" my father asked. He picked up the envelope. My name, Isabel Hartley, was written on it in Eleanor's handwriting, perfectly replicated by Thomas, who had used an old birthday card as a model. "Should we open it?" my mother asked. "She's not here, is she?" my father replied, already tearing it open. They began to read. I leaned closer to the screen. My heart pounded. First came confusion, then denial, then visible panic. "What is this?" my mother said, flipping to the second page. My father's lips were thin. "She's bluffing. We never signed formal papers." "Actually," Daniel said slowly, picking up the documents. "You did." His eyes scanned the page. "This is a court-sealed adoption certificate. From 1996. You both signed it." "She forged it," my mother snapped. "It's notarized," he replied, holding it up. "And there's a DNA test showing her biological link to Eleanor." "Let me see that," my father demanded, reaching for the papery. But Daniel didn't let go. "There's also a link to security footage here," he said, holding up the USB, "to what happened at the hospital." He pulled out his phone. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was the tinny audio of their own voices, captured in crystal clarity. "She's not our daughter. We owe her nothing. We're not responsible." When the video ended, Daniel didn't speak right away. He just stared at them, at the two people who had raised us both, who had loved one child and tolerated the other. "You left her to die," he whispered. "Daniel, don't be dramatic," my mother began. "Don't," he said. "Don't spin this." "She manipulated this entire situation," my father growled. "She's always been good at looking like the victim." "She almost died," Daniel said, his voice rising. And you walked away. You told the doctors not to treat her. You called her a burden. She's not your real sister, my mother snapped reflexively. Silence. Even through a screen, the silence was heavy. Daniel slowly turned to her. Not my real sister? He repeated. He looked at the letter, then back at them. You raised her. You let her call you mom and dad. You let her sit at our table. And then you abandoned her like garbage. And now you want what Eleanor left her? She poisoned you against us, my father said, shaking his head. No, Daniel replied. You did that all by yourselves. My mother collapsed into one of Eleanor's chairs, rubbing her temple. We need to speak to our attorney. That footage was probably edited. They'll never believe that, my father muttered. We were calm, clear. God, this is a disaster. I closed my laptop. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew what it would be. Strategy, denial, blame. Not once had they asked how I was. Not once had they shown an ounce of guilt. They weren't sorry. They were only sorry they got caught. But for the first time, Daniel had seen it for himself. And that was enough. The next morning, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. It's Daniel. We need to talk, please. I stared at the screen for a long moment, heart steady. Not angry, not afraid, just ready. I replied, tomorrow, 10 a.m., the cafe on a 12th and Main. When I arrived, he was already there, seated at a corner table by the window, a cup of coffee in front of him, untouched. He stood when he saw me, visibly startled by the cane, by the slight limp, by the scar on my left cheek. Isabel, he breathed. I sat carefully, still getting used to the tension in my muscles. Daniel. I didn't know, he said quickly. About the hospital. What they said, what they did, I didn't know any of it. I nodded. I believe you. He looked relieved. I watched the footage 5 times last night. I couldn't sleep. You shouldn't have had to see it, I said. But maybe it's good that you did. I feel like my whole life was staged, he said, voice low. Like I grew up inside their lie without ever seeing the corners peel away. You were their real child, I said quietly. I wasn't, he flinched. You were my sister. You are my sister. I didn't always act like it. But I knew even as kids how different they treated you. I just didn't understand why. I looked down at my coffee, black with 1 sugar. He remembered. I'm not asking to rewrite the past, he said. But I'd like to be part of whatever comes next, if you'll let me. I didn't answer right away. There was too much behind us, too much silence, too many years of invisible wounds. But there was also this moment. I don't know what the future looks like, I said. But we can start small. A pause. Then a faint smile spread across his face. Small steps. I can do small steps. In the weeks that followed, my parents doubled down on their campaign to discredit me. They filed a defamation suit claiming the letter had caused them emotional harm. They even tried to subpoena my medical records again, arguing I'd manipulated public sympathy. But they had underestimated the courts. Again. The footage, the affidavits, the documented conservatorship attempt during my coma. It was all presented clearly. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice, stating in his ruling, truth, even when painful, is not defamatory. The defendants demonstrated a clear pattern of emotional neglect and abandonment. Their actions speak louder than any words. The story made local news. Headlines, Twitter threads, anonymous comments on community boards. Their reputation unraveled in days. They left Seattle within a month. Moved to Scottsdale, Arizona. No goodbye. No apology. No second letter. Are you okay? Daniel asked when we heard the news. I paused. And then I told him the truth. Yes, I think I am. Because by then, I had moved into Eleanor's house, my house. The Victorian needed work, new insulation, a repaired roof. But I kept the original moldings, the crooked staircase, the porch swing where we used to drink tea in the summer. Daniel moved into this guest suite for a few months while he rebuilt his life. He got therapy, changed careers, started volunteering at a community legal aid center. We didn't become best friends overnight, but we became something real. On Sundays, we hosted brunch. Rhea came often, sometimes with her girlfriend. Nurse Joan joined once a month. Thomas stopped by with scones and legal updates. We filled the rooms with laughter, conversation, and warmth. And slowly, the house began to feel like something new. Not a shrine to the past, but a vessel for everything ahead. We were not bound by blood. We were bound by choice. A year after the accident, I stood in the dining room again, this time not as a victim, but as a host. Everyone I loved was there. I raised my glass and said, "To family." Not the one that shares your last name, but the one that shows up when it counts. They echoed, "To family." That night, after the last guest had left and the house had quieted, Daniel stepped out onto the porch with me. The sky was clear, the swing creaked gently. A faint breeze rustled the lavender near the steps. "Do you think they'll ever regret it?" he asked. I thought about it. "I don't know," I said, "but it's not mine to carry anymore." He nodded. "I used to think being abandoned would break me," I continued. But it didn't. It remade me. Because the truth, however painful, had set me free. And now, in a house once filled with secrets, I was building a life filled with something far greater. Truth, healing, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be earned.